Chapter 2. Female-male comparisons. Let's begin by looking at three prominent early psychologists who also happen to be women. Mary Wilton Calkins, Margaret Floy Washburn, and Helen Thompson Woolley. While Mary Wilton Calkins was refused her degree by Harvard simply because she was a woman, she is now considered as one of the most important first-generation American psychologists. In 1903, she was ranked 12th in a list of the 50 most eminent psychologists in the United States. Calkins spent a large part of her career developing a system of scientific self-psychology to which she was ardently committed. Calkins based her system on the conviction that the foundational unit of study for psychology should be the conscious self. She defined personalistic introspective psychology as the study of conscious, functioning, experiencing selves that exist in relationship to others. In her autobiography published in 1930, a year after her death, she attributed her conception of the self as social to the influence of Royce and James. She also wrote, "For with each year I live, with each book I read, with each observation I initiate or confirm, I am more deeply convinced that psychology should be conceived as the science for the self or person as related to its environment, physical and social." It was the general policy of the era that married women could not serve as teachers or professors in co-educational settings. Thus, Washburn never married and served as a professor at Vassar College for 36 years. She was a skilled researcher and prolific writer. Washburn brought many of her undergraduate students, all women, into her laboratory and introduced them as authors on many of her publications. Washburn also developed a motor theory of consciousness. The theory was most fully developed in her book, Movement and Mental Imagery, in 1916. There she integrated the experimental methods of introspection with an emphasis on motor processes. The basic premise of her work was that thinking was based in movement. Thus, consciousness is linked to motor activity. Helen Thompson Woolley found a good match for her progressive aspirations at the University of Chicago, where faculty members such as John Dewey were applying psychological knowledge to problems in education and graduating summa cum laude in 1897. At the University of Chicago, she carried out the first major research concerned with the differences between men and women. Upon reviewing literature on the subject, she concluded that there were marked inconsistencies, contradictions, and lack of data behind the conventional wisdom on sexes. The conventional wisdom of the time was being expounded and published in the form of a theory by the quote-unquote scientists of psychology, with no empirical foundation whatsoever. Among these beliefs, Helen would contend where McGregor-Allens said, quote, "Radical natural permanent distinctions in the mental and moral conformations," end quote, exist between the two sexes. W.L. Distance said that, quote, "Modern domesticated women, like Mr. Darwin's rabbits, were frailer and dumber than either their primate ancestors or their contemporary mates," end quote. Francis Galton asserted that, quote, "Women tend in all their capacities to be inferior to men," end quote. In William James's Principles of Psychology in 1890, which was extremely influential in psychology, he supported the idea. And this idea also stated that, quote, "Women before motherhood are vain, egotistical, irritable, and nervous, but instantly transformed when they have a baby. They become totally selfless, no longer needing sleep, function unconsciously and intuitively, find absolute delight in their hideous infants, are similar to their animal mothers, and do not mind holding feces in their naked hands." So I just want you to stop and think about what that was and what you just heard. Such notions were commonly used as justifications for the exclusion of women from academia and professional realms, the natural reasons why women should stay within their domestic boundaries. Helen Bradford Thomas's work directly challenged these beliefs. Her research provided scientific data to support women's urgings for acceptance into the public domain. Her dissertation involved the first experimental laboratory study comparing mental traits of men and women. She conducted experiments on University of Chicago undergraduates in 7 areas of mental functioning, including motor ability, skin and muscle senses, taste and smell, hearing, vision, intellectual faculties, and affective processes. Her methods were remarkable. Unlike many researchers at the time, she controlled for confounding variables and carefully matched her sets of male and female subjects. She avoided using averages that distort distributions of data. Of her findings, men seemed to be better on motor skills and tasks requiring ingenuity, while women demonstrated better sensory discrimination, memory, and association abilities. However, these differences tended to be quite small. In her review of the sex differences literature, Thompson commented, "There is perhaps no field aspiring to be scientific where flagrant personal biases, logic, martyred in the cause of supporting a prejudice, unfounded assertions, and even sentimental rot and drivel have run riot in such an extent as here." And that concludes our short overview of 3 important psychologists.